right, that is Parshat Pikudei. It is the last Parsha in Shemot. We're talking about it's going to be Shabbat Chazak this week, finishing off and moving on to Vayikra. All right. So today we're going to be examining, we're talking about the approach, how Moshe inaugurated the Mishkan, the tabernacle, how that pertains to education, general education today. Right?
You don't always follow the rules. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good title. It's clickbait.
Yeah, it is. On a quick picture.
So the Torah portion we're reading this week describes the building and the initiation of the Mishkan and all its offerings. Starts with a 7-day, a 7-day period called the Shivat Yimei HaMiluyim. That was not the official inauguration of the Mishkan, and that happened on the 8th day. And this was basically it was a training period for the Kohanim and for Moshe and for the Kohanim and the Mishkan to figure out how they're supposed to do the service. So on the day that it was inaugurated, which was the Rosh Chodesh Sivan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, everything was done a little bit differently for all these 7 days and on that 8th day. Reading text number 1.
Okay.
166.
I just wonder, I looked at this introduction. It says, do you believe that children should be told up front about the difficult practices such as fasting on Yom Kippur and not watching television on Shabbat? Or should we draw them in with Afikoman presents and Hanukkah gifts to give them the hard stuff later in life?
What do you think?
I think you should draw them in right away.
Tell them about everything.
Yeah, tell them about everything.
Well, then you're going to like this class.
Oh.
All right, text number 1.
Okay. During the 7 days of initiation, Moses erected the tabernacle, performed the services in it, and dismantled it each day.
All right, so if we look in this verse, it makes 2 points. 1 point is that Moshe performed the service and that he built it and took it down every single day, right? In the morning, he built up the Mishkan. At night, he took it down. And then the next morning, did the exact same thing again.
He really needs to learn how to tell a tape. That didn't happen. I thought that no, that hasn't happened yet.
No,
His father-in-law hasn't taught him yet how to delegate.
It was his morning workout. That was, So both things are a little unusual. Number one, Moshe was not a Cohen, right? His brother Aaron was the Cohen. Moshe was just a Levite. I mean, Moses was not just anything, but he was a Levite. He was a Levi. He was not a Cohen.
Are you?
Nope, I'm a simple Jew. No, my grandmother's like on my mother's side. So her father was a Levi. So all my cousins are Levites,
Mm-hmm.
and then her mother's family were all Kohanim. But that didn't go down to me. No, we're just regular Jews.
I think that happened with me. Well, no, it doesn't go down. I think my father's family were Levites, but my mother had some Kohanim in her family. But it doesn't transmit.
Nope.
Does it?
Generally, because
it just transmits from father to son.
The Judaism goes from the mother's side, and tribal affiliation went from the father's side. So that's where I was basically.
Question?
Okay.
Hi, Phil.
Yeah, do you say Moses was a Levite and his brother was a Kohen?
Yes.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, because at that time there was no Kohanim or Levim yet. It wasn't really established. So when God established it, originally Moshe was supposed to be a Kohen. He was supposed to be the high priest.
Oh,
but
okay.
He had a little bit of an argument with God by the burning bush, where he told God he didn't really want to go do what he was told to do about freeing the Jews. So God told him, "You're still going to go free the Jews, just now you're not going to be the high priest anymore either. That's going to go to your brother now."
Okay, so at that time, then it was by appointment.
So everything was a point. Basically, everything is getting started now, right? So they started off. They're both from the same tribe of Levi, right? They're both descended from the tribe of Levi and from Kahat specifically. but they at that then that's when it splits. Anybody, Moshe and all the other Levites, right? There was thousands of them, right? All became Leviim, and the only people that came Conan were Aaron and his sons. So there was like, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 people that were Conan, and then unfortunately a couple of them passed like soon afterwards.
They were dumped into the ground. They were.
No, they're the ones that they tried bringing.
That
was Korach.
That was a
They
strange
They tried bringing
they were struck
an
down.
unauthorized sacrifice in the Holy of Holies. That was
They
that was
were
problem.
struck down.
Yeah, and then
They
his
were
grandson Pinchas, actually, who was born already at that time, only became a Cohen later, because that's whatever till he defended the Jews from sinning. Basically, that's when he became a Cohen. That's basically all the Cohen basically come from Aaron, from Aaron, Moshe's brother. All the Levium can't trace all their lineage definitely back to Moshe. They trace it back to the tribe of Levi, and some of them definitely come from Moshe, but we don't know who. Like, if someone's a Cohen, they come from Aaron.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. So once the so Moshe was a Levi, he wasn't a Cohen. Only Aaron was a Cohen. So once the Mishkan was inaugurated, the only people that were allowed to bring sacrifices were the Kohanim. So this was the only case where we have Moshe bringing the sacrifice, right? In the Mishkan itself, the only person that was allowed to bring sacrifice was the Kohen. But now he did serve as a Kohen, and after the Mishkan was inaugurated, it was erected wherever the Jews went, right? We traveled throughout the desert. Every time we traveled, the first thing to get there, we get there first. The Levium would come, they'd set it up. Great. And then it basically stayed. It stayed until we moved. It didn't get put up and put down, right? But here it's every day he's putting it up and taking it down at night, right? So this is two odd things that are happening in this week's Torah portion.
Yeah.
So
what's the other odd thing?
One is that Moshe brought all the sacrifices, where he was not a Cohen.
Oh, yeah. And the other one,
as much as he was the greatest Jew to, I guess, ever lived, he wasn't a Cohen. And Moshe put it up and put it down every day. And the one other slightly odd thing that happens on the 8th day, right? The 8th day that it was getting inaugurated, which was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan. Moshe once again built the whole Mishkan. They put up the altar, and he brought sacrifices, and then he put up the screen basically to block off everything. Generally, as we're about to learn, generally they're supposed to screen off the yard first, the area where the Mishkan, where the Mizbeach, where the altar was first. But here he didn't do that. First he brought the sacrifices, then he screened it off. Question is why, right? There's three things that were done differently than any other time. That'd be in text number 2. Phil, read for us.
He placed the altar of the burnt offering in front of the entrance at the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and he offered up the burnt offering and the meal offering as God had commanded him. He set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar and put up the screen at the entrance to the courtyard. And with this, Moses completed the work.
Right. So first he put up the altar, and then he brought sacrifice, then he put up the screen.
Where the screen was at the entrance?
The screen was the entrance.
Was it like a gate?
There was like 2 pillars, and then there was just like how all that fabric. So one of the parts of the fabric basically covered over the entrance, and that was the entrance to it. Right. So it wasn't just open to the public. So which makes more sense, right? When you build a house, when you don't just put your bed in the middle of a construction zone and go to sleep. You don't just put your kitchen in the middle of you finish building your whole house, then you put in all the interior stuff because you don't want it to get ruined. You have to, when you're living properly, you make sure everything's built first. So why did Moshe deviate from this practice? And you may say that Moshe was in a hurry, right? He had to just do it fast, but that didn't really that didn't really make sense, because technically every time they traveled, they would have been in the same hurry, right, to get the sacrifices done. But every time they traveled, they put up the screen first. So why did Moshe do a different practice this time? Why did he bring sacrifices basically that were open for anyone to see?
Oh, and then he put it.
Right. So whenever the Jews traveled, the tribe of Levi was in charge of carrying the whole Mishkan. Right. There's three families in the tribe of Levi. There's Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, and each of them had their task of what they did. We learned, I think it was last week, where the Nisim, where the leaders of the tribes all brought. They donated the wagons because there was nothing left for them to donate at the end, except for the stones of the breastplate and wagons, in order to transport all the parts of the altar of the Mishkan that were allowed to be transported. Certain parts had to be held, like the Aron wasn't placed on a wagon ever; it was always held by the ark.
Oh,
the ark was always held. It had like poles coming out of it, so that was held generally.
They probably needed 4 people.
It was 4 people, 1 person in each corner. It says actually it held itself. Technically, it was like spiritually, it was such a spiritual thing that it didn't weigh anything while they were holding it, but they did transport it. Yeah. Right. So that was the tribe of Kohath, and then the other ones, as it's going to explain in text number 3, we'll learn all about that.
The Gershon and Merari family, in charge of erecting the tabernacle, preceded the Kohath family, who carried the sacred furnishings. They would erect the tabernacle while the Kohath family traveled behind them. They would erect the tabernacle in advance, so that by the time the Kohath family arrived, they would find it complete. They would bring in the ark, the table, the candelabra, and the altar.
Right. So it was a whole operation every time. It wasn't like, just do whatever you want. It was set up. This is how it's supposed to do. And the first Gershon and Merari families would come first, make sure the whole place is set up, and only then would they bring in the rest of it. So why did Moshe do it differently? Right? He could have done it the same way. He could have done it the same way again. And it's the question we could add on to this question. When Moshe,
this wasn't the first time it was done.
This is the first time it was done, but Moshe, as we're about to read, Moshe told them how to do it in general, how things should be set up. But why did Moshe go out and change it? Right? We're about to read how Moshe told Bezalel, who was the architect generally for the whole Mishkan, that first he told him to build all the interior things like the altar, the Aron, right? The showbread table, the menorah, build all that stuff first, and then build the rest of the Mishkan.
Well, but Moshe was tasked with building the menorah, I think.
So Moshe was going to build the menorah, but then he said he couldn't figure out how to do it, and he threw it into fire, and it came out because it had to be handed out in one piece. But in general, he told him to build everything in the inside, all the furnishings, I guess how you'd put it. And then build the outside, but Bezalel objected. He said this doesn't make sense, as it says in text. It's number 4. Back to you, Phil.
Okay. Bezalel objected. The common custom is to build the home first and then fill it with furnishings. Moses replied, "You are in the shadow of God. Surely that is what God said to me." Indeed, this is how he built it, the tabernacle first, and then the furnishings.
For whatever reason, we're not sure why, Moshe told Bezalel to build it with the furnishings first and then the outside. But Bezalel talked him out of it, and Moshe ended up agreeing. So why did Moshe go against this when he built it himself for the first 7 times? Like, why did Moshe go against this when he built it and inaugurated the Mishkan, the tabernacle on the 8th day? Right?
He didn't build it, though. I thought you said.
So Bezalel built it physically. I think he actually built it and designed it. When Moshe, put it up. When Moshe assembled it, right? Why did he go against what he told him to do? If that's how they ended up agreeing how it should be done, why did Moshe again go against that? And even more on top of this, what to add to the question, because in Judaism we can't just. And God, and because that was the way that God actually told him to build it, was to build the outside first and then build the inside. That was the order that God told him to build it in. For whatever reason, Moshe had switched it, and then Bezalel talked him back into it, to doing it with the outside first and the inside. So Moshe agreed. That's how we should do it. We'll build the outside, and then you build everything on the inside. And that's how you should construct, and that's how it should be assembled. In general.
And God said build the inside, and then
God said build the outside, then the inside. That was the order that it was saying. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Moshe replied, "You are in the shadow of God. Surely that is what God said. Surely that is what God said to me." That's what God. That was the order God had told him. Hashem had told it to him, and was the outside first, then the inside. I'm not sure. We're not sure. I don't think we're sure why Moshe switched it necessarily, but I'm saying he ends up agreeing with Bezalel that it should be built the outside first, then the inside, and it should be assembled that way. It should be assembled that way in general. But to add on to the question, because we can't make things just simple, we have to keep adding on. If a sacrifice is brought when the Mishkan wasn't fully set up yet, then it doesn't count, right? It goes against Jewish law. When God told us how to do it, God told us all the details here. And one of the details was the Mishkan has to be fully put together. And it can't be a yard that's not screened in, as we're about to read. So how did Moshe go against this and just do it without the yard that was closed in, without screening in the yard? So it says in text number 5. Back to you, Phil. No. Phil just read the last one.
Yeah.
No, I think back to Marilyn.
Moses
Got a lot of reading in today.
Moses offered the burnt and meal offering at a later point. It is forbidden to offer up a sacrifice in an open yard that is not screened in. Doing so would have rendered the offering unfit, for it would have been slaughtered outside of the tabernacle. He therefore concluded that he brought those offerings at a later point.
So this is the Ramban, or Nachmanides, as he's called. He lived in Spain. He was a great philosopher, a Jewish scholar. I wrote on Jewish law. Who lived, he lived in Spain.
Nachmanides, was he the one who had the king of Spain challenged him to a debate?
And then he had to leave Spain.
He won, and they had to leave
Spain. And says he reestablished actually the Jewish presence in Jerusalem. Like there was I don't know if there was anybody there or there wasn't a minion there. And he reestablished it where people started coming back.
I know in one JLI class we read about that, and he wrote so well, Nachmanides.
He's one of the greatest Jewish writers, one of the greatest works on Jewish law, and on the Talmud in general, like one of the most famous Jewish sages.
Yeah.
So he takes the opinion where that it was against Jewish law to bring the sacrifices without it being screened in. So what's the Torah saying is that first that there wasn't in order how the Torah saying it. First it was screened in, and then the sacrifice were brought. That's how he translates. That's how the Ramban, Nachmanides, translates it to make sense, because otherwise Moshe was going against Jewish law. So he was saying that no, it wasn't going against Jewish law, because he did it in the right order. He screened in the yard first, and then he brought the sacrifice. That's how he explains it. So we know from that it is against Jewish law to do it that way. But Rashi doesn't seem to say this at all, right? If we, who's the general commentator on the whole Torah, Rashi doesn't. Rashi just seems to take the view that Moshe brought the sacrifice and then he screened it in, right? We have generally there's some arguments about exactly how things happen. Like sometimes there's some sages that argue, rarely if ever, but except for the whole Talmud.
He brought the sacrifices and then he screened it in.
So that's how Rashi says it, right? That's what it seems like from the Torah, and that's how Rashi says it. Nachmanides is saying that doesn't make sense. That can't work according to Nachmanides, and he just switched around the order and said that's the order that it was. That at first he screened it in, and then he brought the sacrifices. But Rashi seems to take the opposite view, where he actually brought the sacrifices first and he screened it in. So our questions will still stand according to Rashi. Why did Moshe do it in this way? Right? Why did Moshe do it opposite?
Mm-hmm.
'Cause, 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 'cause we have two problems with Moshe bringing the sacrifice before screening it in. Number one, it doesn't make sense to really get started with doing the sacrifice in the middle of construction. If they didn't put up the screen yet, they're still working. Like, why would he do the sacrifices then? And Jewish law doesn't permit this, right? So we're going to answer the questions backwards. First, we're going to answer what about Jewish law, and then we'll explain the logic about why he did it do it the other way. So this whole thing happened on the first day of the month of Nisan, as I mentioned, which was the inaugural day of them building the inaugural day of the Mishkan, right, where they fully inaugurated and said, we're going to start bringing sacrifices to God now here only with the whole service. That's in text number 6.
There were people there witnessing the sacrifices.
Yeah, that was because it wasn't screened in. But so they're inaugurating it now to show what happens. General people were allowed to be there if you were bringing a sacrifice or something, but that was when you're already inside. It wasn't supposed to be like a viewing party from the outside. It was like you're.
It's supposed to be closed off.
Closed off. It's a service to God, right? It's not so. But even though people were allowed in, if you're bringing a sacrifice, you were allowed into certain parts of the temple or the Mishkan. We'll read about it in text number 6. I think we're back to you, Phil.
And God spoke to Moses, saying, erect the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, on the first day of the first month.
But we know this wasn't the first time that Moshe had erected the tabernacle, right? He already done it 7 times. The last 7 days, he picked it up and put it down for 7 times, right? That all happened in the week before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or the week before the first day of Nisan. So this is the 8th time that it was done. And that explains why the Torah refers to the Mishkan as the 8th day, as it says in text 7.
It came to pass on the 8th day that Moses summoned Aaron, his sons, and the Jewish elders.
Right, saying on the 8th day. What's the 8th day? Because the 8th day of Moshe building the Mishkan, right? It's the 8th time he did it. And Rashi explains what does that mean in text 7b. Back to you, Phil.
Oh, I was doing even numbers. Okay. And it came to pass on the 8th day of initiation. This was the first day of the first month, Nisan, the day the tabernacle was erected. Right.
So Moshe inferred from this that the Mishkan would need to be initiated the first 7 days before the real service could begin. And he got this from the fact that God enacted a 7-day initiation period for the Kohanim, as it talks about in text number 8. I'm going to confuse you now. You're doing even as it feels like I'm doing us.
I'm on.
This is what you must do to sanctify the priest to serve me. Bring Aaron and his son to the entrance of the tent of meeting and bathe them in water. The sacred vestments that belong to Aaron should belong to his children after him, to be exalted by them and to invest them with authority. The priest that succeeds him from among his sons, who will enter the tent of meeting to serve in the holy, must wear them for 7 days. Do for Aaron and his sons all that I have commanded you. Initiate them for 7 days. This is what God is telling.
This is what God is telling Moshe to how to basically inaugurate the Kohen.
Okay.
So the Kohen needed to be initiated, right, and brought into this thing, and brought into the service at the entrance of the temple, of the tabernacle, which was of the Oel Moed, which was part of the Mishkan. So this told Moshe, right, you can't do it at the entrance of the tent of the Oel Moed if it's not there. So he had to build it, right? He has to put up the Mishkan in order to be able to do this. But we learned in what says in text number 6, right? If we go back to text 6, it says God had told him that on the first day of the month of Nisan, you shall build the tabernacle, right? So this tells Moshe that the tabernacle should be permanently up on 7 days later on the first day of the month of Nisan. So how did Moshe do both of these instructions? He built the tabernacle every day, and did the initiation of the Kohanim, but he took it down every night. So it wasn't a permanent building; it was just up in order to be able to do its service of initiating the Kohanim. And then on the 8th day, On that meant on the 8th this whole time the Mishkan wasn't being initiated, right? The whole point of it being up was for the Kohanim. Now on the 8th day, it's now the Mishkan's turn to get initiated into the service too. Right now, it's the Mishkan's turn to be able to join in this, to join in the join the party, to join in the service, to join in the service of God. So the 8th day was the inaugural day for the Kohanim, right? Because it was the first day they brought sacrifices, but it was the initiation day of the Mishkan where it was being brought in. And the very fact that it's called the 8th day, it means that it's still part of the initiation process, right? God didn't say now we're starting from scratch. Now it's day 1, saying it's the 8th day of our initiation process, still part of this initiation, right? Still part of bringing it in.
But it's the 8th day, but prior to that, Moses kept every day he would build it and he would take it down.
Yes, so I'm saying that's because that was.
And he offered a sacrifice before he initiated the Kohanim.
I think so. I'm honestly, I don't remember 100%. But
when did he do that?
I'm not sure if he brought sacrifice. I think he brought sacrifices only on the 8th day, but don't quote me on that. I'll pause the recording.
He didn't do the sacrifice.
So on the 8th day, he did this. He did the sacrifices. We're about to read.
Maybe that was part of the initiation.
Yeah,
to show them how to do it.
So I was on the 8th day, right? So this is the 8th day where the Mishkan is now open for service. Moshe is now showing them how to do the sacrifices. The first 7 days was just initiating the Kohanim with oils and with other things. Now we're showing you how to do the service in the actual temple, in the actual Mishkan. That's
with
in
other
text.
People present.
With the Kohanim present, right? And the Kohen showing the Kohanim how to do it.
Oh, so it was a private instruction.
Well, I think it was to show the Kohanim were the ones that brought the sacrifices. The Leviim were kind of helping. The Levites would help out. It could be that they were there too. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. So that's in text number 9. I think we're back to Phil now.
Moses also.
You're the odd.
Yeah, very odd. Moses also led the service and brought the communal offerings on the 8th day of the initiation phase, the day the tabernacle was erected.
The day the tabernacle was erected, but he was erecting it.
So now we're saying that it's permanently being built, right? Well, permanently until they moved, but now it's not. They're not taking it down every day anymore. Right now it's up until we have to move, right? So that's what it means the tablet was being erected. So even though Moshe had brought sacrifices prior to that for the last 7 days, it says he did bring sacrifices. On the 8th day, the Kohanim brought sacrifices, and Moshe also brought sacrifices. So we can see from this that it's still part of the initiation. The fact that Moshe was able to bring a sacrifice means that the Mishkan wasn't fully working, I guess, yet. Fully on schedule, right? So it's still the initiation, and that's why Moshe was able to bring it, even though he was not a Kohen. All right, because since it was part of initiation, Moshe was teaching them and showing them how to do it. A lot of the restrictions of what had to happen in the temple didn't apply. Once it was initiated, then Moshe was no longer able to bring sacrifices. But that only happened later, not today.
Maybe those 8 days prior, or the 7 days prior, maybe he was figuring it out himself so he could teach them.
It could be. He was going the instruction off of God.
Yeah.
It could be, but God had told him to do it for 7 days. It wasn't like Moshe just chose the number. It was he was listening to whatever God told him, but he was bringing that sacrifice then too. I guess then he showed them on the 8th day how to do it too. I am assuming they were watching most of the previous days and how to do it. But the Rebbe explains in text number 10 about
the 8th day of initiation was part of the preparatory education phase for the tabernacle service and the commandment to make for me a sanctuary. It was not problematic for the service to begin immediately upon the altar's erection, before the screening of the yard, because the rules for an educational service are different.
Right. It's all about education. Moshe's teaching them how to do it. And that's why Moshe was able to bring an offering in a way that contradicted the law, right? He was able to bring in he's able to bring a yard that's not screened in, because it's not yet fully the Mishkan there. We're still trying to teach them how to do it. So right, that's how it works according to Jewish law. Now the question is still, why did Moshe do it before the yard was screened in? We understand why Moshe did it now somewhat, because like he's still teaching them how to do it, and it's okay because it's not fully there yet. But why did he do it in the yard that wasn't screened in? Like, what was the point? What was the point of that? I understand that it's okay now, but why would he do it? So the answer is the fact that this whole period was a time of education, right? They were trying to they were educating he was educating the Kohanim on how to do it. So normally, no one would think of bringing sacrifices before screening it or before screening in the yard. That would be like setting up your house before your house is built, right? But educational settings, education is different, right? There's something you would do in a classroom that you won't do anywhere else, and for good reasons for that. And to explain this, we have a story. There's a story about the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, who wrote the Tanya, the founder of Chabad, thought of Chassidus. Which happened. So the story happened in the late 18th century, which was an interesting period for the Jews. There was a movement at the time called Haskalah. The Haskalah movement, basically, which was or the Enlightenment movement.
Enlightenment.
Yes,
so the Jews became like non-Jews. They got to vote. They got to go into that society out of the ghetto. That's Haskalah.
Yeah, so that they were able to do in like France. They weren't able to do that in Russia at the time because Germany was more open. Yes, but I'm saying with that, it was more of there was an idea in Judaism where they were trying to free themselves. They didn't like the past of listening and doing what God wanted. Yeah, of course, and that was kind of the start of that time. So it started in Germany. It started with Moses Mendelssohn, kind of was one of the originators of it, and with some amongst other people, right? That was in Germany and kind of spread again throughout the rest of Europe. So it went through Vilna and went through Lithuania, which was the heart of the, I guess, what they call them, the Snagdim, were the opponents to Hasidic thought. They're nowadays they're the one, I guess, the non-Hasidim went through their circles, and then they decided to tackle the next people that they want to tackle was the Hasidic groups. So there's a man by the name of Shimon from the city of Zamat, right? That was his name, or the city where he was from. Who was one of the people from the Haskalah movement. So he figured a way how he's going to spread Haskalah, how he's going to spread this enlightenment, is that he's going to integrate himself into the Chabad community by posing as a teacher, as a Melamed, as a teacher of kids, and he'll kind of poison, I guess, the kids' minds subtly against Jewish traditions. Right? This was his plan. So he figured the best way to do this was he was going to go meet. He was going to go meet the Rebbe. He looked like a pious man, and he actually was scholarly because he had gone to the yeshiva. He knew how to study Torah. He had studied Torah, even though he went off the path. So he was able to put this face on that. He was this big pious teacher. So he wanted to basically teach. So he'll get in and he'll basically worm his way into the kids' minds, and through that, basically just turn everyone off from the youth. So before getting into the story, we're going to look at a Rashi. It gives a little context to the rest of the story. It might look a little random, but it's part of the story. The Rashi that we're talking about concerns the events of when we have the story of Yaakov and Esav, right? What the story is that Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov for a bowl of lentils. Not the best deal that was ever made. And Yaakov went to go get the blessings then from his father. His mother sent him to go get the blessings first because he deserved the blessings because he bought the birthright. He deceived his father. And then Esav came back and was all, annoyed, I guess, would be put it mildly.
He thought his brother was joking when he said he reselled his birthright.
No, I don't think he thought he was joking. He didn't think through the consequences of his action. Yeah. He was like, what do I care for my birthright? He's like, my birthright is basically like, it's Jewish traditions and everything. Like, I don't care for that. Like, he was a hunter. He didn't care for any of that. So it was a legal thing that he had done. It wasn't just words. It was I don't know if they signed a contract. I don't know if they signed a contract, but it was basically it was a verbal contract or something. Yeah. So when Esav came in now, it says, I want my blessings. Yaakov, it says, Vayicharad Yitzchak, right? It means he shuddered. It's normally translated as shuddered, right? Like what happened? That's text 11a. It was odds. I think we're up to Phil.
Yeah, and so the next one. And Isaac shuddered a great shudder, and he said, who then is the one that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate of everything before you arrived, and I blessed him. He too shall be blessed.
Right. So on this notion that Yitzchak shuddered, Rashi offers two explanations. What does it mean that he shuddered? That's text 11b. Marilyn, back into the odds.
And Yitzchak shuddered, as rendered in the Targum. Is that how you say it? Targum. He was perplexed. The midrashic explanation is that he saw purgatory open beneath him.
Right, so Rashi gives two explanations. One is the simple; it's called the Pshutei Shel Mikra, the simple explanation of it, which is that he was perplexed. Like, what happened here? Like, first I had one son tell me he was the firstborn, the next one tells me he's the firstborn, and Yitzchak was basically blind at that point; he couldn't see. The other one is he saw Gehenna open up in his room. So that's why he's shuddering out of fear more.
Is the Targum, is that a book?
The Targum is Targuma, I think, is the on the side of Chumash is the Targum Onkelos. I think that's what it's talking about. It's the
commentary.
You could find it actually. Yeah, it's 2733. Right, so it says the Targum is this. This is the Targum. Basically, it's translating it into like Aramaic and also some explanations. So it says the Yecharad says the Utva, right, which means that he was perplexed. That's what that word.
It was kind of it was.
It just
translating. It was in Aramaic. It's kind of a translation in Aramaic.
It was a translation, but also as in addition to being a translation, it's choosing which words to use as a translation. So it's also somewhat of an explanation how Onkelos, who was the translator, understood it. Right. So that's why he says he wrote the words utva, right? That means that he shuddered, right? So that's actually on the side of it's translated. It translates every single verse of the Torah.
Oh, do we have that? Do we have that
in English? Yeah, it's in every Chumash. It's on the side, but I don't think it's translated. I don't know if there's anywhere where it's translated from there into English. But that's on the side of every Chumash. Actually, there's a command. There's a mitzvah to read the Chumash and that every single Friday. And every single Shabbat, basically, to read the whole parsha and that every week. It's called Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum. Right, you read the verse twice and then the Targum. It's a mitzvah to do also.
And who wrote it?
His name was Onkelos. He lived in the times of the second temple. He was the nephew of one of the Roman emperors, I think. And he converted and became Jewish, and his uncle sent troops to basically try to convince him out of it, and then he managed to convince them to convert, and eventually his uncle stopped sending troops because he was losing too many troops to Onkelos convincing them, until he came himself, and Onkelos basically just said that this is what I'm doing with my life, and that's it. And he became a great Torah scholar, basically, and wrote Targum Onkelos. So that's who the Targum's talking about. So that's a simple explanation, right? He was just shuddering. And then the Medrash, where Rashi sometimes brings an additional explanation, generally after the simple explanation, is that he saw Gehenna open up in his room. He saw purgatory open up in his room. Right? So it's not the like straight up in the word V'chared, but it adds a different element to the story. So now back to our story with the Alter Rebbe, with first Chabad Rebbe and Shimon of Zamut. And this is actually how he told over the story. Shimon of Zamut told over the story, which was then heard by was told over by someone else to the previous Chabad Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, who wrote it down. That's going to be in text number 12.
Okay.
Back to Phil.
Yep. On Wednesday, my turn arrived to be received by the Rebbe for a private audience in the chamber the Hasidim call the Supernal Gan Eden. When I entered the Rebbe's chamber, I was struck with fear and awe by the appearance of his face. His powerful and penetrating glance and his mighty and deliberate voice inquired, "What can I do for you?" I immediately recovered and calmed myself. I said, "I am an elementary school teacher in my hometown, and I teach my pupils according to the rules of Hebrew grammar." The Rebbe leaned on his forearms. Then he raised his head, opened his eyes, and asked me how I explained the passage, and Isaac was seized with very great trembling to my students. I explained it according to the first interpretation of Rashi, that it means he was perplexed, I replied. "And why don't you explain it according to the second interpretation of Rashi, quoting the Midrash, that he saw purgatory open up beneath him?" he asked. "In my opinion," I replied, "one shouldn't fill the pupils' delicate minds with Agada in general, and especially with subjects such as purgatory that might frighten them. We must especially abstain from teaching young children things they can't even imagine. The pupil will wonder how the large and wide opening of purgatory could fit into Isaac's small room. And how could its fires, which have been blazing uninterrupted for 5,555 years, enter the room, and yet Esau and his father Isaac survived and were not burned to a crisp? And how does the Midrash know that he saw purgatory open up beneath him?" he asked further. I remained silent, making no reply. Obviously, I had no answer. Indeed, this would not be the first gross exaggeration found in the Midrash and Talmud. When he saw that I remained silent, the Rebbe said, "When Esau entered Isaac's room, Isaac asked him, 'Who are you?' To this, Esau replied, 'I am Esau, your firstborn son.' But this was a lie, for he had already sold the birthright to Jacob in a legal sale with all the required formalities." Isaac knew this, and he was very frightened by the lie that attempted to annul a reality that was valid by Torah law. This caused him to tremble, for telling such a lie resulted in purgatory opening beneath him. When the Rebbe finished speaking, he leaned on his forearms, as he had done before. Then he raised his head and opened his eyes. It is customary that whenever he receives people, even during the daytime, there are two lit candles, a Chumash and a Zohar, on the table. He now lifted one of the two candles, scrutinized me, and said, "You came here from Vilna, but you claim to come from Zamut. You convert little children to the idolatry of Haskalah, but you claim to be a Melamed. Because of these lies, purgatory opens up beneath you. How many souls have you already destroyed? Yet you continue to betray. Yes, it's true, you are a heretic, and anyone who goes down that road will never return." I quickly fled his chamber.
All right, that's a pretty dramatic story.
Yeah.
So from him pretending to be a scholarly, pious man to the end where the Alter Rebbe basically exposes him and throws him out, where he went running away because he was worried the Chassidim the story ends off where the Chassidim actually pulled him into a dance, because there was a customary dance where when people came out of private audience, they would dance together, a Chassidic dance, and he wanted to get out of there because he was worried if the Chassidim found out, they were going to stop dancing and maybe change their, do something else.
Yeah.
Put it nicely, right? Yeah, maybe little corporal punishment. So he basically wanted to get out of there. Now the Alter Rebbe's fierce reaction to this is understandable. If we look what was happening at the time, where Haskalah was ravaging the religious Jewish communities, and he basically wanted to stop it here, right? So he's basically telling him off and saying that the fires of Gehenna are opening up underneath you for what you're doing, like stop what you're doing now. So he's fighting a battle for the Jewish soul. So it makes sense where his reaction came from. So I guess where we could look in the Alter Rebbe's, I don't know if we could, but if we could say what the Alter may have been thinking, maybe it was that, right? Because he's fighting for this, right?
Lied and gone undercover.
Yeah.
This man had. But where does it even say his name?
You
said his name.
It talks about it. Well,
the teacher. What was the teacher's name?
So it doesn't. It talks. It says it. It's not in this excerpt, but it says it before this in the book that it's from. It's called Sefer Toldot Admor Zaken, right? Where the previous wrote based on stories that happened with the first Chabad Rebbe. It says his name there, but it doesn't. Since I had mentioned it earlier, I guess since we mentioned Shimon of Zamut. Because in those days, most Jews actually went by their.
You're from
Zamut. But most people went by their. You said you're from Zamut, but you're actually from Vilna, right? That's where he.
Oh no, you say you're from Vilna.
From Zamut, yeah. He came from Vilna. Vilna was the capital of Lithuanian Torah thought. They called it the Jerusalem of Lithuania, and he was basically there trying to do the same thing, but he told them that he came from Zamut because they didn't want to tell him he came from Vilna. So, basically, Alter Rebbe totally exposed him.
But part of the problem was, with the Haskalah is that I read a story about a young man who wanted to be a doctor so badly, and the Christian community said you can't be one as a Jew. So he became a Christian.
Yeah, so
that's what happened. And even was that Mahler or the musician, the composer, Gustav Mahler? It happened to other famous people.
Well, there was the Israeli who was the prime minister of England, who was Jewish, but he converted to not Catholicism because they didn't really like that in England. He converted to being a Protestant in order to become prime minister of England.
Oh, I didn't know that. Was that
converted?
How long ago was that?
In the 18th, at some point.
In the 18th century?
No, in the 19th century, but sometime in the 1800s. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, he was Jewish also, but you couldn't get anywhere. So that's where there was not that they had no. That was the biggest flaw. The big flaw there too. That didn't even whatever they may have thought, it didn't even help. Not what they were doing. There was no excuse for what they're doing. Was never good, and it didn't even help them.
No, it didn't help them. They couldn't.
As we're going to read soon, there was a saying. Soon that there's a saying from the skull was that be a Jew at home and a Gentile on the streets, right? Yeah. Do whatever you want in your home. Do every single mitzvah. Do it at home. Don't do it in the streets. That was their worldview, right? Pretend to be like everybody else. And we saw where that brought us in Europe, where Germany was the originator of Haskalah. Most German Jews, unfortunately, were not religious before the war.
No, they weren't.
And still didn't help.
Even if they were quarter Jewish.
Yeah, so it didn't help. Didn't help them at all.
Concentration camp.
Yep. We're getting back to the story. If we look at what his explanation was for not teaching the second explanation in Rashi about purgatory, Gehenna opening up, you might think it makes sense, right? Like you're teaching kids, you don't want to like get into the big explanation, so you teach them the small thing. So like, if looking at it from our perspective, what was the Alter Rebbe's like fierce reaction to that? Maybe he could have just calmly explained it more or something. Why did Alter Rebbe feel so strongly about this?
Well, this isn't an answer, but I know that this isn't the answer, but I'll tell you something. Kids like scary stories, and they like to be run after by monsters.
That is true.
And they like to know that there's a God.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. Kids feel it very strongly. But besides what kids like or what they need, you're asking why.
No, just in general. So what? Like technically, when you're teaching, it might make sense if you're choosing what to teach. You teach the more simple one. It makes sense. He was shuddering because he was confused. What happened? He was perplexed.
Yeah.
That would technically make more sense. So why?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, do you want to tell young kids about the Holocaust?
Yeah, so like I guess.
What age should you tell them about the Holocaust?
So what age do you teach kids things? Do we instantly throw them in with all the explanations, or we just give them the baseline idea and then eventually teach them the next part? All right, so it's a question of education. Like what way do we educate people?
I think as far as Gehenna goes, I think they could handle that. If
Yeah.
you didn't give them all the details of it, I don't even know. Oh, wait a second, we don't have that kind of.
We have
Gehenna anyway.
Gehenna. Well, that's why it never mentioned the word.
Christian
It didn't say the word. It said purgatory, right? We don't have hell. We have purgatory. Purgatory comes from the word purge.
Yeah, purge.
The whole point is to purge our sins.
So that wouldn't be scary to children.
Well, it's not a pleasant place, exactly. It says that our souls are thrown around. It's called kafakela. Souls thrown from one side to the other. It's very unpleasant. It's very unpleasant to the soul, in general. It's not like they're sitting and it's not like you're sitting in Florida in the summer and in the heat. It's worse than that. Yeah.
What? Yeah, I think there are appropriate ages. Like you wouldn't have a young a baby or a toddler light girl light the candles. You wouldn't have a baby do that. You wait till the girl is 3 years old.
So like we could have steps of so why was the Alter Rebbe so vehemently against it? Maybe it was just his way of teaching. Like, so why was he so strongly against it? So the answer is that there's two. When we are teaching, there's two things we're teaching. We're in education, definitely in Jewish education. There's two steps in it. First is to teach them the basic rules of life and the rules of the Torah and knowledge about religion. So from this aspect, it makes sense. You teach it orderly. Like, this is what we do. Like, we're teaching a kid about how a Jew lives in the whole day. First thing we start out is you wake up in the morning, you say Moda Ani, you wash your hands, then you wash your hands again, and you say all the morning blessings, then you pray, then you eat breakfast, making your blessing before you eat. You teach it orderly. That would make sense. And from there we move on to the advanced ideas. As it talks about in text number 13, I think we're back to you.
Okay, the first principle of practical pedagogy is to establish a regular order. Every form of pedagogy seeks to impart knowledge the pupils do not possess and to develop certain character traits. How is this achieved? Primarily through repetition and habituation, through daily and hourly measured repetition, by progressing in a balanced, deliberate, and progressive way at all times and places, and by using consistency and precision.
Right. That's one part of the education, is like again and again and again, and eventually it becomes your way of life, and that's what you do. Like, when you look at a piece of food before you put it in your mouth, you make a blessing.
Yeah.
Well, the best way to do it is you sit down and you think about the blessing you're making, but you could, by repetition works. Like, that's your instinct to do too. Before someone eats bread, they wash their hands. Right? That's what we do.
It's true.
That's what's talking about kids, right? We have to. But eventually, good habits could be formed as adults too. It is harder. Yeah. But it says God doesn't give us a challenge we can't overcome. So it just means you have more strength in order to be able to build it.
That's true.
But the other aspect of education is that children in general, we should embrace our teachings and become very committed to that. And how do we get them, regardless of whatever challenges come up to them? And how do we do this?
This way.
By showing them, by showing them to the heart and the soul and the essence of the teachings, right? And these parts are vital parts of it. And we show them parts of the Torah that they can't generally understand right now, right? We give them the explanation that Yaakov was shuddering. Yitzchak was shuddering.
Well, we do the same.
But he also, but then he also had the other part.
is that we might not understand something, but by doing it, we understand it. We begin to understand it.
Yeah, but it's also even more than that. It's even if we're never going to understand it, right? Some parts of Judaism it's just kosher, for instance. It's laws that God gave us that we don't understand, but we do it anyway because some things are just higher than our understanding. And it's important to show kids this, where there are some parts that we just we expose them to things that parts of Torah are beyond our understanding, and they should have the knowledge of that. So when they come into a place where it's not so easy to do something, that Torah, it's not always about just being easy. Some things are just higher than our understanding.
Because God said to do it.
Yeah. So that's in text 14a. Back to Phil.
Although it is important that every Jewish child be taught according to their path, we mustn't be content with a limited pedagogy that is common around the world, though this too is consistent with the Torah's approach. Rather, our education must also include sacred content, even if it is beyond the child's current understanding. We must even teach the concept of self-sacrifice on occasion.
And this is how we ensure that kids will be fully devoted to Judaism, right? That they're going to practice the Torah and do mitzvot, even when they leave, let's say, some of the Jewish school, or they leave their house, where they're brought up that way. Even when they go out into the world, they're still going to do it because they were brought up in a measure, knowing that some things are higher than my knowledge, and there's an idea of self-sacrifice. Not just self-sacrifice in our lives, but sacrificing things in general for our Judaism, right? Because some things are just more important than my daily pleasures. Then text 14b, back to the evens.
This pedagogical approach produces the desired result that even when they grow old, they do not turn from your teaching. It inspires people to affirm durable, permanent commitment to Judaism. Even when they step out of the house and the environment of holiness, they remain strong and firm in their Judaism.
So we now understand the second reason why Moshe practically did the sacrifices without the screen being there. Because he wanted to show that doing service to God and doing mitzvot and following the Torah isn't just reserved for when we're in shul, or in the temple, or in the tabernacle. It's for everywhere. He wants to show everybody that it is for every place that we are, whether we leave the holy environment that we may be in and go into somewhere else, into the streets. We still have to be these proud Jews. As I said before, the Haskalah, their idea was that you should be a Jew at home, was one of their slogans. You should be a Jew at home and a Gentile on the streets. This was one of their common phrases. They thought you could just, Judaism is pick and choose. At home, I put my yarmulke back on, my tzitzit, I pray, I make a bracha. But when I go out to the streets, I take it off and I look like every other person on the streets, right? Because they want it to be fully accepted, which again we discussed didn't work and doesn't work. And they thought you could just take up Judaism on and put it on and off and choose what you want to do. But the Mishnah is teaching us, Moshe is trying to teach us that it's not just for inside, right? We don't just always have this. We don't just, because there's a screen there, it's sealed to the inside. And we're starting off, the Mishnah is supposed to be out for the whole world and everyone, that we should do it in every single place, right? It's not dependent on our environment. We're proud Jews regardless of where we are. So thank God nowadays we live in countries where we don't have to be worried. We live in the U.S. or generally around the world. People live in countries that we don't have to be worried, thank God, about being Jewish anymore. Right, we can be proud Jews in the streets. The government's not bothering us, thank God. Which less than 75 years ago was not the case. 80 years ago, I'm saying, was not in the recent past. wasn't always the case. Thank God this country generally was, but in Europe it definitely was not. But still, being Jewish entails some self-sacrifice, right? We can't always, if our friends are going to a restaurant that may not be kosher, we have to have that sacrifice. Maybe I can't go with you, or something's happening on a Friday night or on Shabbat. We have to choose whether we come to shul and listen to the rabbi's great speech, or maybe watch, one of some football playoffs or something. We have to make a choice sometimes. And that is sacrificing. Well, it's not necessarily the same level of self-sacrifice where they're literally risking their lives, this is our sacrifice of nowadays, where we have it on a daily basis, where they didn't necessarily have that in Europe in the same way. Right, so this is offering sacrifices to God on the street, the same way that Moshe opened up and kind of offered the sacrifice to God. It's not wasn't on the street, but opened it up. So if we teach Judaism right like this to the next generation, and even bring it into ourselves too, we internalize this, and we're willing to sacrifice our Judaism because it's so important and it's such an essential part of us. We can't just choose not to do it at that time. So another aspect, though, of sacrifices, that many of the sacrifices were eaten. The ones that Moshe brought were eaten, and this represents the idea of that people, when we teach them, internalize what we're doing. It's not just for the outside; it's for being internal and bringing it in and letting that change you. Just like food does that, as in text 14c. Actually, back to Phil.
We offer sacrifices, sometimes of bodily pleasures and the animal soul, even if we are not in a home that is illuminated permanently and obviously with God's holiness, such as houses of prayer or study. We also eat sacrificial meat. This represents the idea that our firm commitment to Judaism becomes our food and nourishment. We remain committed even if we are in an environment that is spiritually arid and is not surrounded by the walls and boundaries of holiness.
Right. So this is why the Alter Rebbe insisted that children are exposed to the deeper level, the deeper meaning in the pasuk, and to the heavenly concepts, even if they can't fully understand them. If the kid can't understand how Gehenna opened up, right? We still have to expose them to this, because we have to absorb. They absorb ideas that are beyond their understanding. It makes them more committed, right? It gives you this deep level of commitment, where it's not just based in our understanding. There's a deeper level of commitment here we may not even understand it yet, and this ensures that we keep Judaism even when it gets hard. Right. So we started the class with that question of, well, how should we teach Judaism? Do you just teach them the easy parts, about getting money on Hanukkah and getting gifts on Purim and dressing up and getting stuff with Afikomen? Or do we do it also with teaching them that before Hanukkah we have a small thing called Yom Kippur, where we don't eat, and on Purim we also have to listen to the entire Megillah without talking. All the hard parts. And on Pesach, you have to clean the entire house to not have chametz. You have to teach it all together, even the not as fun parts, because that gives us a stronger, and gives children definitely a stronger connection and deeper meaning and deeper commitment to Judaism, which will carry us through even when it's hard.
And so Moses left the curtain open, or he left it open so that the world could see what he was doing.
Yeah,
he did that.
Yeah,
so that people could see what he was doing.
So people could see what he was doing, and showing that Judaism is not just reserved for the Mishkan. It's not just reserved for the tabernacle. It's reserved for. There's no reservation. It's everywhere. It's supposed to be done everywhere. That's why Moshe left that open. All right, and we'll end off with text 15. Okay. It's a nice and long one.
Okay. Many parents take a common practice approach with their children. I don't want to overwhelm them with anything over the top or too intense, so I'll leave it to them to discover religion slowly without pressure. And so they are shielded from anything their parents deem too extreme or fanatic. Teach them some Hebrew, a little about Israel, and rituals around the holidays. That's nice. Who doesn't like apples, honey, and Afikomen treats? That's great. But asking them to pray at age 10, to not watch TV for a whole Shabbat every week, to really not eat non-kosher candy, relax. Let's take it easy. They're just kids. Let's not scare them off with too much too soon. You're forgiven for thinking so, but Moses teaches us that sometimes you must buck the common practice and leapfrog a couple of steps. Pile it on early without worry. On the contrary, doing so will ensure that even the walls of whatever holiness they have come down, they will be strong with the values and passions you imbue within them before the walls went up. And as it is with children, so it is with us. Who wants to go crazy and bite off more than he can chew? You think to yourself, I've got to take this slowly and methodically. This is a process and it shouldn't take on too much. It shouldn't take on too much too soon. I shouldn't take on too much too soon. You're right and you're wrong. You're right on an average day, but not every day is average. Sometimes you must get on the express train. Don't wait until you've built an entire building or Jewish infrastructure before signing on for that all-night Shavuot learnathon, getting your own pair of tefillin, or committing to monthly mikvah visits. Taking the clues from Moses, who offered a sacrifice even before the walls went up. You too can take the plunge right now. You're not ready? That's okay. The Jews in the desert weren't either. Moses did what he did anyway, and it worked. Be like Moses. It'll work for you too.
All right.
Okay,
Destroying their
good
Judaism.
lesson.
Be like Moshe.
That's a good lesson.
And keep Judaism going alive and strong.
Yeah.
And we'll keep doing that. Mashiach should come soon to
Amen.
with our strength of our Judaism to make that happen.
Amen.